Hey, Samir, think about the best team you've ever worked on. What made it work?
That's a really good question, Jenny. I think the team I would highlight is one that I worked on over a decade ago. It is one of the first teams I worked on that developed a computational approach to measuring culture. And I think what made it work is that we had at least three different disciplinary perspectives represented on the team: linguistics, computer science, sociology, organizational behavior. There were a mix of students and faculty. And what was really key to that, making that work, was just a lot of mutual respect, really understanding that we all had different perspectives and we could generate something better by learning from each other.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I can actually think of a lot of my research teams over the years that were really incredible, produced great work together. But I think the one that's most on my mind right now as dean at Haas is my management team. And I think the two qualities that I'm just most grateful for is that each person is a deep, deep expert in their field and brings a kind of level of thinking and excellence to the team, that is diverse and important. And second, everyone is completely committed to doing what's best for the school. So, this kind of deep expertise with a sort of superordinate orientation and commitment to the school, I think makes it a killer team. But this is what we're going to talk about today. And before we bring in our guest, who knows all about teams and will set us straight, Samir, we should do our formal thing first.
Oh yeah, forgot about that. Well, I'm Samir Srivastava, a professor at UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business and co-founder of the Berkeley Center for Workplace Culture and Innovation.
And I'm Jenny Chatman, a professor and dean at the Haas School of Business. And this is The Culture Kit.
Today, we're joined by Melissa Valentine, an associate professor at Stanford in the Department of Management Science and Engineering, and a senior fellow at the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI. Melissa studies how AI and algorithms are fundamentally transforming how organizations work, not just the people in them, but the structures themselves. She's also the author of a new book called Flash Teams, a bestseller. Melissa, welcome to The Culture Kit.
Thank you. It's so great to be here. It's been so fun to have the book out in the world. I've been just delighted with the reception. I get all sorts of LinkedIn DMs where people are kind of like visioning what they can do with Flash Teams. So yeah, it's been fun. And I love this podcast, so I'm glad to be here.
Well, welcome, Melissa. I have to say, your argument that AI is going to make us rethink the organization chart itself, not just automate tasks within it, is one that I find both exciting and a little bit scary and destabilizing. So I'm curious whether you find most leaders are ready for that conversation.
You know what's funny? I was talking to leaders about this before ChatGPT sort of took the world by storm. And I think at that time, leaders were interested in it. It felt like a way that they could, bring more innovation into their companies. I do feel like in the last 2 or 3 years, all that anybody has wanted to talk about is generative AI. So we've really had to do what everyone had to do and kind of pause and be like, okay, what's this new generative AI thing? And then bring that into the conversation. Something that's fun about generative AI, though, is people are now vibe coding some of the software that we describe in our book. So I think there's a way that it is kind of scary and destabilizing, but I think more and more people are having hands-on experience designing products that can help them do stuff like this. So I think that's been pretty fun.
Well, we're going to come back to AI and talk about it in a lot more detail. But Melissa, you were at Berkeley back in January at our annual Culture Connect conference and gave a terrific talk in which you made a really provocative statement. And the statement was that the most important invention from an organizational perspective over the last 200 years isn't AI, but rather the org chart. Why the org chart?
Yeah, so I love that conference, by the way. You guys do such a good job with that. And I have to put the provocative comment kind of in context because I start all of my talks like that. And I'll be like, the org chart. And then I flash up a picture of Dwight Schrute from The Office, pointing to this really archaic org chart. So I'm kind of teasing us as a society right now because I think we're all very hyped on AI, me too. But I do that to sort of tease us and to remind us that we as a society invented organizations because it's through organizations that we do really complex work together. And I like to talk about how organizations have these nice properties that allow us to do so much complex work, things like specialization and coordination. And a lot of that honestly comes through hierarchy, which I think we're going to need to talk about how hierarchy remains very relevant in the age of AI. I make that joke to remind us of all these nice properties of organizations that we've relied on. All of us rely on them: specialization, coordination, all the expertise and accountability that comes through organizations. We rely on it. So it's like an invitation for us to rethink organizations, remember how powerful they are, remember their special, nice properties that allow us to coordinate so well, and then kind of think together about how do we update this organizational form.
Well, let me just ask, based on our conversation that Samir and I just had about ideal teams, how do you critique what we came up with as concepts?
Oh, I love your descriptions of them. I think my hope and vision for what AI can do for us is that it can sort of help us have more experiences like that. You both were describing something where it's people at their best, people with their deep expertise, really finding a way to draw on each other's expertise and become more kind of collectively valuable together. I can think of all sorts of ways that data and tools could help that. My vision is always what if we're not moving information around? What if we're no longer copying and pasting updates everywhere? That we could just meet together, sit together like this, and just think really deep human thoughts, really deep human expertise with a real kind of conscious connection with one another. That's what I heard in what you guys were describing.
Hmm. So you study how concepts like jobs, teams, departments, and managers were actually constructed over time. They kind of feel like furniture, but somebody invented them. Which of those do you think AI is most likely to fundamentally disrupt?
Oh, yeah, I totally agree that it's like wallpaper. Yeah, they've faded into the background, and that's kind of what organizations have done for us too. So I like that framing. I mean, this is my really active research area right now, is I'm trying to watch how organizations are actually changing, especially as people are really actively adopting generative AI. And in the Flash Teams book, we do draw on a lot of economic theory about why hierarchy remains relevant. And hierarchy is ultimately a lot about accountability and coordination. So my prediction is honestly that hierarchy sticks around. I do think that we'll have sort of accountability and centralization that can be super useful. So hierarchy and managers go together like that. I do think departments are likely to change pretty dramatically. And we're sort of already seeing that with engineering and design and product are sort of now in everybody's hands. I keep returning to vibe coding. That's just what I'm hearing so much about right now. But it does feel like those departments kind of collapse in an interesting way, or combine maybe in an interesting way. So I would say that's my prediction, is that's the first one to change. With the most transformation, I think, would be departments.
Well, let's then turn to teams. And you've already mentioned the title of your book, Flash Teams. And of course, that term conjures up different images in people's minds, for example, of really fast-moving superheroes, but that's not what you mean.
That's right.
Tell us, what is a Flash team and what problem is it trying to solve that traditional structures can't solve so well?
Well, it's funny that you say superheroes, because we were super stoked to get a blurb from Adam Grant. He described it as if you've ever wanted to convene the Avengers at work, this book will show you how. So there's sort of a superhero quality to the idea of people coming together and solving problems. So, but more generally, the way we think about it is basically the internet, online labor markets give us so much access to experts everywhere all the time. There's so many people in the world who are so deeply expert, and you can now kind of access them using all these digital tools just really easily. So the idea is, what if we could combine some of those nice properties I was talking about of organizations, all of those nice role structures, team structures, hierarchy. What if we could combine those structures with kind of the speed and scale of online labor markets, of the crowd, is how we sort of think about it. So you could imagine recognizing that you need a team and you need an expert, and you could reach out in an online labor market. You can hire people in minutes sometimes. You don't stop there. You could actually build a whole team like that. I can actually give you an example from one of our early Flash Teams users. So he was a guy who worked at a hospital, and he just saw the same problem kind of play out time and again in the ER, which is ambulances would pull up, and it wasn't until the ambulance got there that they started gathering the doctors and nurses and equipment that was needed. So he just had this simple idea of, what if we built an app that the ambulance could use to coordinate with the ER? And that's a really simple app. But when he tried to get it done within the hospital, all of the sort of folks who had the expertise were really locked out doing other things. So he used our Flash Teams approach to pull together a team of experts that built that app for him in like 6 weeks. And it was really complex. It was really kind of exciting to watch it come together. I always have to joke that like 6 weeks, that was like pre-Gen AI. So it'd be even faster now. But it was like a very fast way to pull that team together from the crowd, solve the problem, and then they sort of disassemble.
I mean, what's kind of interesting about that example and others that I've heard you talk about is that the leaders are not just managing anymore, they're actually designing. They're sort of figuring out what to build, who to assemble, how to structure it. So is that like fundamentally different from what we've traditionally asked of managers?
Oh, yeah. I really like the way you're framing that. I think there's like a way that managers kind of always have to keep in mind, like, what's the problem to solve and who and what are the resources? And they have to sort of match them. It's a kind of a matching problem between the needed experts on the problem. And then managers always have to kind of evaluate how that's going. So it's scoping, it's resourcing, it's evaluating. And when it's really stable, management looks different, right? Like you're managing people over a number of years, then you're helping them think about their careers, like skill development, different sorts of things. But when you really speed up how quickly this is happening, then you see managers doing all of those things like in a really quick iteration. They scope, they resource, they evaluate. They scope, they resource, they evaluate. So they're kind of constantly doing that. And that to me is team design. That's org design. So management as org design is, I think that's the way to think about it now.
Great. So going back to the talk you gave at the Berkeley conference, someone in the audience raised a question that I think merits some more attention. So a lot of the coordination that happens in these fast-moving teams is invisible and often not valued. It's often described as non-promotable work, and it tends to fall on certain people, often those who have less power in the organization. So how can organizations better recognize and value that work?
I think it's very astute to kind of recognize how much coordination goes into coordination, how much kind of invisible work goes into making things work. And I brought this up at the culture conference, and I really think it's a useful, relevant phrase to like think of the word invisible labor. It's been coined in sociology and used in a number of different places. I actually learned the most about invisible labor when I was doing a different study at an academic cancer center. And at the cancer center, some of the patients and their families actually were trying to get the employees and like the doctors and the staff at the cancer center to recognize how much work they were doing to coordinate their own care. And this was an organization that was like very well-meaning, right? Everyone's trying to do right by the patients, but they just really didn't understand how much invisible labor the patients were doing to like make their cancer care come together. So it was through the process of really making the invisible labor visible that the patients were able to get the cancer center to value it. And eventually what the paper's about is the cancer center eventually took some of the coordination work into the organization and took it on themselves. To sort of generalize that back to flash teams, it's the idea of recognizing the usefulness of making invisible things visible. Now, not everything needs to become visible. I mean, to our earlier point, like sometimes stuff is furniture, sometimes stuff is chairs, not people. I mean, but like sometimes like the system is just like wallpaper and you don't need to pay attention to it. But I think it's maybe a more useful leadership skill of the future now that we have all these automated systems to like really recognize where is the invisible labor happening? When do you need to make it visible? When do you need to value it more? Samir, you're recognizing some of the inequality that can happen, right? Are there particular, groups of people who are expected to be doing invisible labor and not have their labor valued? Maybe, as we're not moving information around so much anymore, that could be the kind of thing that we could have more like conscious conversations about. What labor are we assuming somebody else does and not valuing it enough?
So kind of relevant to this topic, you have a recent paper with a title that sounds like a children's book. It's called The Algorithm and the Org Chart.
That's right, a bedtime story.
So what happens when the algorithm says one thing and it conflicts with what the formal structure says you should do? And who wins in that case?
My answer is always measure it. But to put a little bit more context on that, so that's a study that I did several years ago. It was a retail tech company, and they had these very talented data scientists who developed this very powerful optimization algorithm, and they deployed it for their frontline workers, and they were getting like really great recommendations and like really great adoption. And then pretty soon over time that they saw that the optimization was being deployed in these tiny little decision spaces that were just one person's job. And pretty soon they were like, oh, for an optimization algorithm, you should actually be exploring the entire decision space, which right now is being divided up for people. So for an algorithm, you want to give it as big decision space. For people, you want really little like manageable domains. That's what our brains are here for. So algorithms just have a very different kind of decision capability. It's not an argument for full automation. It's saying like recognize the ways that algorithms make decisions. So for an optimization algorithm, you want to give it a big decision space, a big search space, and people need much kind of smaller scoped decisions. That's like what we do well with. So the paper is basically saying we as a human society invented organizations based on the fact that humans used to make all the decisions. And then meanwhile, we invented these cool new technologies called algorithms that make decisions very differently. And right now, we're deploying these powerful decision tools within human decision structures. And it just doesn't make sense. But humans do need org charts. Like we do need roles. We do need teams. We do need hierarchy. That does help us do our work really well. So it's an invitation for leaders to recognize, how do your algorithms make decisions, and have you given them the right infrastructure for that? How do your humans make decisions? Have you given them the right infrastructure for that? And then the kicker, and I do not have the answer, even though I've been studying this for a long time, is how do you combine them? No, but like, I don't know. That's like what I feel like that's the org design challenge of the future is how do we combine those two decision-making infrastructures? The one for algorithms, the one for people, and they're very different.
Well, one concrete way in which that fusion is happening is through the arrival and deployment of AI agents. And increasingly, we're seeing organizations deploying various agents for different functional purposes, and the AI agents working alongside human employees. You have a recent paper that speaks to this. So say a little bit more about how you think this new phenomenon changes the social contract between organizations and workers.
Yeah, I do think that AI agents are an interesting tool that might be able to bridge those two sort of infrastructures that I was describing. So I'm going to describe what I'm hearing as sort of like a near-term technical organizational problem, which is sort of like illustrates what I was saying before of just like how differently data tools versus humans make decisions. So I'm hearing all sorts of stuff in companies right now where they're trying to deploy agents and they're just noticing how differently agents will like consume information than humans. Like really dumb example would be like a human would see like a file name that maybe has like recent, this one, save this one, final, version 2, you know what I mean? And then we'd be like, oh, that's the final one. But an agent maybe wouldn't recognize like, oh, that's the most recent one. And based on recency that I should retrieve from there. It's going to like just search across the whole space and like find something maybe from like 2019 or something that's like not super relevant. Anyways, that is to me like a near-term technical organizational problem is recognizing that agents and humans just really process information so differently. So we can't just kind of do like a one-to-one substitution in that case.
Yeah. But just bringing this back to the topic of culture, since this is a culture-related podcast, in a world where you have humans and agents working alongside each other, how do you think about building a cohesive culture with both sets of workers involved?
Yeah, it seems like another kind of leadership challenge or opportunity right now is for leaders to think about what does culture mean when the employment relationship is changing so much. So I could just give like a simple example. There's a bunch of different companies that I've been studying their agentic implementation. And like, let's take one simple example. Maybe you used to have 200 people who were doing something more manually within a system. And this is not happening that often. But if you do get to like 99% agentic implementation, then maybe you only need 10 people. But everyone who trained the system is now redeployed somewhere else. And then the few folk that remain have to do all of the exceptions where the agents can't do it. So I think it's useful for leaders to just recognize that is like a fundamentally different workforce. That's a fundamentally different job design. And I don't know that we know what it looks like to create a culture around that. I think we like sorely need people who are really good at leadership and really good at culture to kind of get into spaces like that and think about what that means.
So one other topic we want to come to is the pace at which all of these changes are happening. One thing we hear from a lot of leaders is that they're really uncertain about whether they should move as fast as possible on AI adoption or be more measured and find some places to potentially hold back. What's your perspective on it in light of everything we've discussed?
Yeah, this is a conversation I'm really enjoying having with executive leaders right now. I sort of am thinking of it in like three different changes that are happening at the same time. And I think that they're all happening fast. I think leaders are feeling that urgency, and I think it's appropriate to sort of move quickly on them. One is frontline transformation. We had a new Harvard Business Review article come out that talked about what it takes to actually get to high impact from frontline transformation. But there's like getting everyone a license and helping them learn how to use it. And I think that's got to go. I think that needs to be happening right now. There's enterprise use cases where, the C-suite has really sponsored and is actually like paying for like the new infrastructure and the new agentic systems. And there's so much to be learning there. So that's kind of got to be happening as well. And then there's like the third where just people are really inventing something brand new. I've seen some examples where just people are vibe coding their org chart in a really different new way. So I think all of that is happening, and it's a lot to be handling at the same time. But I do think that is the pace that the tools are asking for right now.
Well, Melissa, you've given us a lot to think about. So let's wrap up with what leaders can actually do. If someone is listening to this and they want to start designing a more adaptive, AI-ready organization, what are, say, 3 things that they could do differently?
When Michael and I were writing the book, we were trying to think of a phrase that really captured this idea of recognizing how easy it has become to pull together a team to help you solve a problem. And he and I liked the phrase experts everywhere all the time. So it's like a shift from thinking in terms of expert scarcity to just recognizing there's so many expert people in the world, and there's so many ways to find them, collaborate, consult, have really high value conversations. So that's one, shift your mindset. I think that is hard for people right now because I think we're all really focused on AI, which is probably where we need to be focused. So it's a little bit hard to be thinking like, how do I get human collaborators? I think we're all like, how do I use this new tool? So I'll recognize that shift. But I do think that that is a useful thing, is to recognize how easy it is to like pull people together. So experts everywhere all the time is the first one. And then we think a lot about the moment where you're like resourcing, where you're fitting the right resource to the problem. And sometimes I could be speaking of an expert. What's fun right now is like actually matching the right Gen AI tool or there's like so many different data tools you can draw on right now. So I have an idea. I have this like entrepreneurial idea. And then there's this whole world of like resources. Maybe it's like experts from the crowd. Maybe it's somebody within the organization. Maybe it's a Gen AI tool. Maybe it's an agent. Part of this Flash team org design mindset that you're describing, Jenny, is matching the resources to the problem that you envision. Something that I think is not as fun or talked about, but I think it's getting talked about more and more, is how all of us need to become better at evaluating what's being produced compared to our goal. So even when you just like prompt something really simply, you just prompt Gen AI and you get the output, you have to evaluate, is that good? Is that what I wanted? And I think that there's sort of this way that managers or org design people or like leaders are just have such an opportunity to like identify problems, use an AI tool or build a team, and then evaluate how things are going. And I think that like last piece is so important for the feedback loop and the learning and making sure that you're not creating lots of new stuff, but not landing the value. So I think that like really evaluating it at the end is really important as well.
Great. Well, Melissa, thank you so much. That was super insightful. I think we all benefited a lot from hearing your perspective. And if you haven't already found the book, please do, Flash Teams. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks. This was really fun. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks for listening to The Culture Kit with Jenny and Samir.
The Culture Kit podcast is a production of the Berkeley Center for Workplace Culture and Innovation at the Haas School of Business and is produced by University FM. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to hit that subscribe button, leave us a review, and share this episode online so others who have workplace culture questions can find us too.
I'm Jenny.
And I'm Samir.
We'll be back soon with more tools to help fix your work culture challenges.